This is the Drupal usability meeting for September 24th, 2019. We're going to have a bunch of topics starting with a date picker.
Yeah, I'm just applying the patch, so need a moment.
Very exciting.
Okay, I think I have this running now. I'm going to share my screen. So this issue that I'm going to present is about removing our dependency to jQuery UI date picker. And so what we are using the jQuery UI date picker for is a polyfill. So what we are doing right now is that if a browser supports the native date input field, we choose to use that. We choose to provide that experience for the users. But if the browser doesn't natively support the date input, then we would fall back into using the jQuery UI date picker. And so the reason for removing our dependency to jQuery UI date picker is that we are trying to reduce our dependency to jQuery UI as much as possible because of jQuery UI isn't maintained anymore. And so we've been evaluating different options for the polyfill, and we realized that all of the solutions had some kind of accessibility concerns or usability concerns. And we realized that we would be spending a lot of time fixing those problems, and it would affect a very small percentage of the users. And so I think I have the statistics somewhere here. So I think it was around 9%. Maybe I can search for 9%. So yeah, so it's around 9% right now, the amount of users that are using the browsers that are not supporting the date picker. So what we're proposing as part of this issue is that instead of using the jQuery UI date picker as a polyfill, we just fall back into the default input with a description text and a placeholder. And so we have a couple of different options that we are proposing here. And I would like to ask for your input on which of the different approaches would be good, and if any of these approaches would be good enough for the purposes of acting as a fallback for 9% of users. So yeah, let me open Safari, which happens to be one of the browsers that doesn't support the date picker natively. So over here, I have the solution that we've come up with at the moment. So you can see that we are showing a placeholder which shows the current date and the current time as it should be formatted on the input. So for example, here, if I wanted to write this, then I would have to give it in this format. Here in this. And this is, of course, so there's some downsides on this approach because of, for example, you could have a date that is 11th of 11th, for example, and then you wouldn't know necessarily which one is the month, which one is the date. Or this could be 11/11/1, and then you don't know what is the correct format. So this might not be the best solution, and for that reason, I propose another alternative, which would be that we come up with some kind of some method that we could use to communicate the format using something else than the current time. So in here, I'm using the YYY and MM and DD, basically saying that it's a year, month, and day, which this is, I guess this makes sense for technical people because this is kind of similar to why we use in code, but I'm not sure if this makes sense for the users.
Could we do both? Could we have the like, I don't know what you'd call that, the like suggested text be the current date and time, but the help text use YYYMMDD?
We could. They are not tied into each other in any way, so that would be possible.
I think that's
as well.
the best of both worlds, because then the field defaults to like a sensible value that you would want to type in there, and if you forget what's what, you have the help text that doesn't get erased when you type over it to remind you of which is which.
Okay, so then what we would come up with is something like
Basically both of those. But yeah.
Yeah, that's completely fine. It's so it would be something like this, and of course we would have to change the time as well.
Yeah, HHMMSS or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
The only thing I would suggest is capitalizing those things. It's just a little bit easier to spot them as templates.
Yeah.
Unless anyone disagrees with what I just said, which is fine.
No, I completely agree with what you just said. Yeah.
Yeah, plus one to that.
My one question is, can we label those two fields themselves? They are, first of all, are they programmatically labeled so that when a screen reader gets into them that they know what they are, and can we actually add labels on top of each of them so that it's visually clear to people who are looking at it that they're actually looking at a date field and a time field?
Great question. So there is a visually hidden label already, which says date,
Okay.
and then there's a title which says date, an example.
Okay.
That's being provided by our date field API.
So are you proposing that we will make this then not hidden, which would mean that it becomes like this? Is this what you're proposing?
I think you just bring up the accessibility concern, and the labels are there. To have the duplicate labels gets confusing, because you have the date range example, which shows you that the date range, the start date would then have start, date, time. By the way, there is an accessibility issue on that start, date, time. If you right click and look at that label, I think it says date and not start date, start time. I'm not sure. You'd have to make your font a lot bigger, but I've seen this. Date list has this problem.
So yeah, it seems like that there's a H4 element which says start date, and then there's a label that says date.
And that's like that. So let's say you have start and end dates. By the way, this is not related to this issue, but if you have start and end dates, when you get to the input, it just says date. It doesn't say end date, end time.
Yeah, it's an outstanding known accessibility bug with the datetime module.
Yeah, dateless. Okay, let's not go there then. Let's stay focused on the. I have a question. Was there discussion in the thread about using a pattern to just reinforce the format so that HTML5 client-side validation would kick in?
Don't use that.
What?
Don't use HTML5 client-side validation. We do not want it.
But what about the pattern? That will. I mean, the client-side validation module picks up on patterns.
Right.
Don't you? Better you are.
The issue is that client-side validation, as it is implemented in browsers, is just find a word.
The problem is that it's invasive for someone who's using a screen reader. It starts telling them that there are errors before they're even at the point where they want that validation, because somebody using a screen reader or a tab key might be tabbing through to see what's there before they actually before they actually start filling out the form. And when there's client-side validation, it suddenly starts telling them error, 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 and they can't really.
I know. It's
yeah.
it's really frustrating. I'm really familiar with this too. I want to be clear. Like for required errors, it definitely does that. For patterns, it doesn't do that.
No, slow down. This is missing the point. You're conflating client-side validation with validation because something is required, right? And the screen readers do say required when you if you've got a text field and it's marked as required and you land on it and then you leave it without filling it in, you'll be told that's invalid. Mm-hmm. But that's the small problem, right? The big problem is when you submit the form and client-side validation kicks in, and then screen reader users don't get told what is going on, mm-hmm. right? It's not whilst you're jumping from one field to another. That's the small problem. It's when you get the client-side validation kicking in because you press submit. This is where it's really, really inconsistent between browsers and horrible.
No, okay. I mean, I'm aware of the issue to turn off client-side validation by default. The pattern would just reinforce that. And I mean, the optimist would say the browsers will hopefully fix client-side validation, but I get. So let's not go there. Let's stay focused on this then. What happens if you enter the wrong value? That would be the question. What's the response? Like if you enter a character, a letter.
I don't know. I'm kind of lost about what we're looking at all, really. It's got something to do with dates.
Yeah, so this is Go ahead.
I skim-read
totally
the issue.
West End up here. Okay, so right now in Drupal 8, a significant majority of the users using Drupal 8 have a date picker experience based on the native HTML5 date functionality that browsers provide. 9% of the browsers don't provide that functionality, and so we have a jQuery UI component in Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 that provides a date picker for those browsers only, but it doesn't have security coverage, and it's end of life, and we'd like to remove the dependency from Drupal 9 core in case it has security issues. So we don't have to maintain it and so forth. So what we're looking at here is when we remove that date picker, in that 9% of browsers like Safari that would have relied on the polyfill to have the date picker, what is the default experience that they're getting without installing anything else? So this is basically like it's the same as any datetime field you'd have on any piece of content. The difference is just that in Safari, which had the polyfill before, we would now have to figure out exactly what the default experience needs to look like. Does that sort of make sense or capture what we're looking at? It's like how in general date and time fields in our existing datetime range, all of those modules, what we need to do from a usability and accessibility perspective to make sure that removing that magical date picker widget doesn't regress the usability and accessibility of the field for that 9% of browsers in a way that's unacceptable.
Right. So what are we changing? Because I'm confused by the issue, because the issue says deprecate, but under the proposed resolution it says remove, and when I look at the patch I'm seeing that a library declaration is taken out.
Right. So it's deprecate in Drupal 8 and remove in Drupal 9. So in Drupal 8, nothing would happen in 8.8. Users who have Safari or who are on a site that exercises this library would get a notification. If they have contrib modules that use the date picker, they get a deprecation message that says, right now you're using this date picker, it's going to go away in Drupal 9. And then the patch that's against the issue right now to remove it is what would actually be committed to Drupal.
Yeah, and it also removes the usage from Drupal core. So the Drupal core doesn't use the library anymore, but the library exists, but it's separate.
So the
And what
library
would happen? Sorry, go ahead.
So is the library will still exist in 8? Is that right?
Yeah, it will
That's
exist in 8, but it won't be low for the date inputs by default because of that's a Drupal core widget.
Right, and what are we proposing to change exactly in the? I'm rambling here. I've been up too long.
I
There's a
think
whole
basically right
JavaScript.
now we load the jQuery UI date picker, and the proposal is we would stop doing that, and browsers that have a native date picker would get the native date picker instead, and those that don't would get the experience that Lowry is showing right now. Is that correct?
Yeah, and this is shown for around 9% of the global traffic.
Yeah, because every other browser, mainstream browser, Chrome, Firefox, etc., all has a native date picker, which would show up in lieu of these text fields.
And presumably, I don't know about Apple's roadmap with Safari, but over time, that 9% would go down to 7, 6.
Yeah, we would anticipate it would continue to drop off as more and more browsers, as older browsers are no longer supported, and as more browsers adopt HTML5.
Do we know if are Apple planning to support this at some point?
I haven't heard anything.
Okay, I'm okay with this approach. I think it's like it seems fairly intuitive and simple enough that it doesn't add too much more complexity. One thing I'm wondering, I think we sort of hinted at earlier, was about the validation of patterns. So like, is someone forced to enter it as it is there with dashes, or if they enter like colons between the date, would they get an error, or would it just auto correct in the Drupal validation?
I think it should fail. I'm just gonna try to enter.
Yeah, the date is invalid. You have to enter it in the way the computer wants.
So I think this should be changed to the format that we,
yes. Yeah.
instead
It'd
of
be
the
nice
date.
if it's forgiving, and
So
then it
yeah,
makes the adjustment.
exactly. So why are we?
Feels like a whole rabbit hole to go down. So
Yeah,
I agree with that, but I think I would split that out into its own issue to like make this a nicer experience, because the deprecating and removal of the library as a Drupal 9 blocker or something, it's related to Drupal 9, and making this more nice is a good idea, but it's only going to affect what 9% of overall users.
From a
fair.
product and usability and accessibility gate standpoint.
Wait, what's this 9% about?
That basically 9% of our users would be seeing the interface that we're showing here, or experiencing the interface that we're showing here, with just text fields and not the native date picker.
Where does that 9% come from?
I think it's the total of Safari browsers and yeah, good question. Where does the 9% come from?
So I think we have a list on the main. Let's see. We have a link here. Can I? No. Well, we can just say, can I use date?
Oh, right.
So it comes from. So here we can see that IE11 and Safari and Opera Mini are the major ones.
And the major what, sorry?
Major browsers that doesn't support this.
The browsers that would have the experience that Laurie just demonstrated instead of a date picker widgety thing.
Right. Well, that 9%. If we're talking about checking this to see that there's no accessibility regressions, then that 9% figure is irrelevant, or it's misleading.
Sorry,
And-
yeah, you can have accessibility regressions, but I was saying making the form input nicer, where like if I don't read the directions and I type in slashes instead of dashes, it doesn't nicely fix it for me. I'm saying that is a nice to have, and that is a nice to have that I don't think should block a Drupal 9 quick release. But if there are accessibility regressions, that absolutely does need to. But
Right.
the current validation doesn't do that, so I don't feel like that's a regression.
I mean, one thing that
I
we
don't
definitely
quite
should
get
do
where
is,
the 9% comes from.
okay, so 91% of browsers have an experience already in Drupal that they will continue to have. 9%, or I guess 91%, and then 9% of browsers have the experience provided by the jQuery UI date picker widget that we're trying to remove. So that's what the 9% comes from. So we're trying to determine if the usability and accessibility of the default experience provided by datetime fields in Drupal core is sufficient to meet the needs of those users whose browsers aren't in that 91% that do have their own widgets. So yeah, we want to make sure there's two things we want to make sure. We want to make sure that the accessibility does not regress from the current experience, and it may be that, I mean, like depending on the client you're using, it may already be that the default datetime fields are being used and not the widget. I'm not sure. That's definitely worth testing though. And then the other thing that we want to make sure is that the usability is acceptable for the plain field thing, and so that the only blocker, the only UX, there wouldn't be a UX gate blocker for it. We would just have a follow-up to improve the design of the field. Does that sound right?
So that 91% is based on what? Is that some measurement of who's actually using those browsers?
So it's based on global browser traffic.
Right, I get you now. Yeah. So the issue there is that if you're talking about screen reader users, then it's a completely different landscape as to which browsers they're actually using.
Right.
I want to pause and be like, oh my God, you're totally right. Because
So
Safari would be the predominant one on a Mac that someone would be using.
So
VoiceOver.
We do have some figures for this, but they're based on a fairly small sample size of like 1,000 respondents to a survey or something, not like millions that you might get for some other survey. But like say 60% of the whole population are using Chrome, but it's like the number who are using Chrome with a screen reader, it ain't 60%.
So what I think that we need to add clearly as a required step of this issue is that we need to do a full accessibility test side by side of the current behavior in Safari. Let's use Safari as an example, with using voice navigate or using a screen reader, and not the graphical interface, and then compare that with the experience of the current patches no date picker widget.
So is the HTML changing at all?
The actual markup of the fields, labels, all that is not changing now.
So
as far as I know.
Wait, but that description is changing. It's really important. That description is going to be the key to accessibility. And Angie, your suggestion, like, we can't rely on the placeholder text if we want accessibility. We need to say MMYY dash DD, and then in parentheses say, EG or IE example, and then list the date example, because placeholders are not reliable.
Sorry, why do we need to do that? We have both. We have a placeholder text in the field, and we also have a description down below which uses YYYMM.
The placeholder's not very accessible. That's like a known
Yeah.
issue.
So Angie, I like what you were proposing, but I think Jacob's right from an accessibility standpoint. First of all, I know that the labels are visually hidden right now, but I'd love to see them on there for accessibility reasons. But that aside, I like what Jacob's proposing for that description text, where you include both the YYY, MMDD, and then in parentheses, EG, and then the current date. That way you're doubling up so that it's very, very clear. Here's the format. Here's an example from right now. And when Jacob's saying that the placeholder text isn't reliable, that example in the placeholder will only be visible to those people who understand that example in the placeholder text. So adding that duplication within the help text will within the description text will just be a little bit more helpful for people who wouldn't necessarily get that placeholder text.
Yeah, I need to also bring up, can you make the markup bigger? Because the accessibility is so, I think that enter date using format description, what element is it associated with? Is it associated with the date element or the individual widgets?
So right now it's just a div. It's not associated to any element.
No, but is there an area described by?
Yeah, that's what I was.
Yeah, it's definitely going to need that.
So they have the title attribute. That's what we need.
No, don't rely on the title attribute.
Sorry, can I take a step back for a second? I just want to clarify the markup that's currently being shown is the same markup that's in head, right? That isn't being affected by this change, right? Like that's so these are existing issues that we might need to fix for the whole date picker, or for the whole date time field, in order to resolve the blocker. Larry, am I correct about that? Like the markup is not new. This is.
Let's see what is the scope of the markup changes.
Fields in Field API, or is it in Form API?
One of the two.
So you can't rely on title or placeholder as help text because title is basically just for sighted mouse users and useless for anyone else. And placeholder isn't there when you're actually in the field.
Yeah, the title is pre-existing.
Yeah, I'd like to get rid of it, but that's not an issue here.
Yeah, so the title is there for, I assume that it's pre-existing and it's for browsers that don't have a native date picker support and have no JavaScript. So it's being added for them beforehand.
Sorry, how the JavaScript is adding the title?
No, the title is pre-existing and it was added so we are using the jQuery UI as a polyfill for browsers that have JavaScript but don't have native support for the date input. So we've added the title as a fallback in the backend for those browsers that don't have support for either JavaScript or the date input. So it's a pre-existing title. Yeah. And what has been done is we've added this description text here.
Oh, I've seen that in the patch. Add instructional text describing the required date and formats. These will be hidden on JavaScript. And what's that about? Why are they being hidden? That have a native date picker.
So it's being hidden because this is not relevant for you if you have native date pickers, because it will be set by the date picker.
Can you, show an example of a native date picker in some browsers?
So this is now in my in the format that my browser is being set to use, which is, I guess, European or Finnish, I don't know. So yeah, so the diff, the description text, isn't shown below, but the title is still here. So, but that seems like a pre-existing problem, not caused by this, as far as I can tell.
So before this, it didn't have any.
Larry, is
Well,
this in,
yeah,
this is in Chrome though,
right.
right? You need to look at it
Yeah.
in Safari.
Yeah, I'm just looking at and first how it is in Chrome before. So the title exists there, and let's see how it is in Safari.
Has this got any description configured in the field? Like if it's a form API or a field API field,
So this
it's
is
got
how
a description.
This is how it works before. Apparently there's like no help whatsoever on the time in which format are you supposed to enter it.
I think if we're going to add any help text, we should give it to everyone.
But because it depends on your browser, we can't give that to everyone.
Because different browsers render the widget differently. So
We can only give it for the browsers that don't support it, because then it's based on what we support. Because then it's just a normal text input.
I'm mocking it up right now. I'll shoot it over in Slack in just a moment, but I'm just kind of mocking up where the describe by and label and all of that for what we're talking about. Just if that's.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, so as we can see, there's at least one pretty significant problem here, which is that there's no help by default at all.
So date in an empty box, and you don't have no idea what's going to go in that empty box. Thanks, Safari.
Yeah, like
Or
you don't know if it's a
thanks,
time
lack
or.
of us. It sounds like when we did all the datetime field work and all the HTML5 work, we did not check the combination of the two in Safari.
Yeah, there's a ticket on D.O to put a time picker shim in there, which, by the way, I think we're steering away from, which is a good thing. It would be a drop down. It would do like a little H2, like a little drop down that happens.
I'm really confused about why we would only want to give help to some people. I don't.
Well, because the format is restricted. Like if you're on Safari, you have to enter the year, the month, the day. On other browsers, because it switches to the date picker uses the browser and the system's defaults. So the format of the date is totally arbitrary. Meaning like right now, this is doing month. What is your system doing? Month, day, year?
Yeah.
On other systems, other systems, it could be any other format. It's completely up to the user to decide what formats well, most users don't do it, but what's the native format? So giving help text could be really risky because you could be saying it needs to be in this format, but yet the browser has selected a completely different format.
So let's see if it's switching to the Buddhist calendar now. I think
You're really going to mess up your system.
It didn't, but I'm wondering if I should restart my.
Yeah, I know. It's a really tricky one to know.
But that's like completely different because it has different years and so on. So you can see here, like the year is 2562. And yeah,
right. It's taking a format from the user's own device, not from the Drupal server.
Yeah. So that's why it's really tricky for us to give instructions on what the format should be that the user should be entering. This is coming from the browser. So if I visit this on another browser, it will look completely different. Like we can test this on Firefox. So now it's using this type of format here, and it looks different again.
Right.
So yeah.
That didn't. Was this anything to do with the pattern thing that was mentioned before?
No, and this doesn't change at all on this patch. This is pre-existing. So what changes is how this behaves in, actually I don't even have the patch applied right now. So this is the old behavior. So this is what changes. This is what you see in Safari right now. So this is the jQuery UI date picker. So you see, I'm just gonna reload this so we have no value. So you see two empty input fields, and they've been described by a label, and there's a title which shows an example of the format. If you click this one, it will open the jQuery UI date picker. However, time is only described by the visually hidden label, which is time, and then there's a title which gives an example on the format.
So actually, it looks like we're making the accessibility in Safari better by removing this. Because at least it tells you what it is.
Okay, I just put it up in Slack, a really quick, horrible mock-up that's pretty ugly, but hopefully trying to be fast there, and hopefully that helps.
Is there a way to embiggen that a little bit?
That's good. You've split the two helps up with I think we saw that the two helps were one div before, weren't they?
Yes, they were. And the workaround that's in the existing workaround is that there's title attributes added to each one of those date and time elements that just specify. I'm like looking at the code. I was just there. It says parenthesis e.g format, and it uses the HTML5 date format as the title attribute.
It's useless. Nobody knows they're there.
Yeah, and that EG, see, the problem is that's being read to people who have browsers at work, and that's not the format that they're entering. So it's a little there's.
Yeah. Oh right, that's the same problem.
Oh yeah, I think I put the wrong.
By us.
I was doing this really quickly, so if any of the details are wrong, it's more about the labels and described by.
Yeah, but so does everyone agree that this would be appropriate solution? Because I think this is something we can implement.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, if that's what we need for accessibility, I think that's fine. It's a little more cluttered, certainly, than the other version, but it's important people be able to use it. So
I think it's.
And Andrew raised a good point that the Safari usage among the screen reader using population is huge. So fixing it right in Safari does make sense.
Yeah, we definitely don't want there to be a regression, but it looks like the situation's already so bad there anyway that
this help text that we can see is currently visible will be invisible in another browser. But how is it invisible?
See, let's refer to the source of the truth, which is the patch. So it's hidden by JavaScript.
I mean, how is it hidden? Is it removed?
So it's hidden by,
or
yeah, it's hidden by JavaScript. So
display none. That's it, right? Okay. Here's a snag. That if we have an area described by which points to an element which has display none, it will still be used as the description. There's usually if you've got display none on something, it will be hidden from assistive tech. But there's an exception to that, which is that you can put display none on an element and still use it with an ID reference in ARIA described by. So if you think that that has been hidden because it's got display none, then it's not, because it's got an ARIA described by. So there, I think you'd have exactly the same problem. You'd have a pattern. You'd have a format that was written by Drupal, which didn't match the format that the browser thought from the user's device settings.
And then is the solution there just to also use JavaScript to remove the ARIA description attribute from the element, so that when the screen reader gets to it, there is no tie between the input and the description div, which is hidden?
Yeah, that could probably work, but if you're relying on JavaScript to do that, you may as well just remove the element from the DOM entirely and remove the ARIA described by thing. You could just remove the whole lot.
Oh, so instead of hiding it with CSS, just strip it out.
Yeah, just remove it programmatically. Delete it from the DOM.
So probably what we do is we make it hidden by display none, and we use JavaScript to remove it later. So there's no blinking effect.
Oh, so it's hidden by default. Okay, so uses display none to hide it in all cases, and then it is actively shown by JavaScript if necessary?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay, if you've got ARIA described in there, then all assistive tech will get it, regardless of which browser it is.
Yeah, and if there's no JavaScript, then there's a bit of a problem, which is that they could still have so you could use a browser that does support the date input, but doesn't have JavaScript. And therefore, it wouldn't be removed by JavaScript.
Then maybe it can be added by JavaScript.
Yeah, so should it be the other way around? So we add it with JavaScript to there.
I don't know. This is
I feel
why.
like there's probably, with all these polyfill solutions, they all, from what I understand, they all kind of rely on JavaScript in some way. So it's sort of a inevitability in some ways when you start doing polyfills.
So are we fine that, so basically we would have the status quo for the no JavaScript users if we went with that approach, because the status quo is that no JavaScript only is helped by the title attribute.
No, the title, ignore the title attribute, because at some point we're going to rip that out. Cannot rely.
So I'm assuming that no JavaScript users is, so no JavaScript users are lower percentage users than users that have JavaScript enabled. So what should we do?
Okay, here's a suggestion that kind of flips it around a bit. What if this was handled on the server side by reading the user agent? And again, I don't know how reliable that is, but that cuts out the problem of JavaScript, where you can determine browser by the user agent, and then the support is identified because.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is severely not reliable, to the point where like lots of like bots and stuff fake a user agent. Like, yeah, we really can't rely on that at all.
But it's also not just the user agent that we're worried about here. If I'm right, then it's actually the locale that the user agent has. You know, has somebody got an American copy of Windows or a French copy of Windows? You know, that is that right? That was the when we said that the way that the year, month, date order in the, depending on which browser and which device you had.
Yeah, their system language setting, etc. could decide that.
But we don't have to worry about that because we're not showing this at all for those users. But I still feel like that going to the route that we are detecting the browser in the backend, that's going to be another rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's probably.
The thing is, if you get to, I took a native date picker for a spin in a couple of screen readers before this call, and it's come on a bit since the last time I saw it. Last time I really properly tested it. So it was when I was moving from the month to the day to the year, it was at least telling me, you know, this is a year spin button and this is a month spin button. So that was good, but I haven't tested them all yet.
But this won't change that behavior in any way. This doesn't affect any of that.
Yeah, but if there's browsers where it isn't working and we've just taken away the other method, which was the jQuery calendar, you know, I don't actually know how many people were preferring the jQuery calendar over the manual entry.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that this affects some users. There's certainly some users that has been using the jQuery UI input, but it's, as we know, based on the statistics, that it's a fairly small percentage of the users.
Is it correct that like with other jQuery UI components in core, this may be made available in Contrib?
This will be available in Contrib.
Okay.
Yes, it definitely will be. It may not be maintained like all the other jQuery UI stuff that we're moving out of core, but there will be a contrib module that's available to install if someone needs it.
But the HTML before and after, ignoring all JavaScript, right? The HTML before and after is a type equals date. Is that right?
Yeah.
So do we have a solution here?
You have a what?
Do we have a solution? Is what Rain's proposing here, if we change the markup to that, does that satisfy everybody's?
So I think we still, so I think we have a consensus that this is something we can move forward with, but we're discussing a detail, which is how are we providing this polyfill? So are we providing this as by default on the backend, which means that users who have support for the date input but don't use JavaScript would be delivered with this message because it wouldn't be hidden by the JavaScript.
I think that's fine.
I
Is
think
the worry
that's
that
fine.
they have JavaScript disabled, but they have native date pickers enabled? Like, is that even a thing you can have?
Yes, it is, because you can disable it in the settings. So
Okay.
it's possible. So what I was proposing that we would instead add this in JavaScript rather than hide it in JavaScript, which means that to get this behavior, you would have to have JavaScript enabled. And in that scenario, no JavaScript users would have this exact same behavior as they did before this patch. It would be not changed in any way.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, so that reduces the scope to not affect people who don't have JavaScript enabled, but still works for people who have JavaScript enabled in a browser that doesn't support
Yeah.
native.
That's not what I heard. I heard in order to get the help text that you need to fill out this form successfully, you need to have JavaScript enabled.
No, to get the help text, you need to have JavaScript enabled, yes. But that's already
not good.
I think it's also, it's heavy-handed to be like dynamically adding help text via JavaScript. Like, it just feels like a more difficult, complex mechanism. for the edge case that JavaScript's disabled. I would just undo what we're currently doing, but Andrew's point of you have to remove that attribute. Like that's
Yeah.
part of the JavaScript. That minor change in the JavaScript is reasonable.
See, yeah, we could, if we just change the area described by based on JavaScript, but left the text in there, because people might actually, even if you didn't have it programmatically associated using area described by, because the JavaScript didn't work, you would still at least have it associated by proximity, even if it's not associated programmatically. So, I mean, you can actually see it next to the thing if you're sighted, right? But even if you're, some screen reader users occasionally go exploring things that are not form elements when they're in a where screen readers sort of bring you into Windows screen readers at least have two different modes, whether you're either in kind of just read the whole page mode or what they call forms mode. And when you're in forms mode, it kind of takes you from one form element to another. But if you can skip out of that, and some screen reader users occasionally go exploring outside of form elements. It's not reliable. That's why you want the programmatically associated version for preference.
So I'm looking at this is before the patch, so I removed the patch completely. This is how it looks like before we've done any changes. So this is the core. This is how the date widget looks like before our changes in core. So there's only the title that helps you. So are we fine if we keep it like this? For these,
I really think that is unshippable, and I'm surprised that we've been shipping it with it like that.
But we've shipped this already.
I understand. That is awful because you literally have no idea what to type in there, and even when you get an error, the error was something like your input is invalid. It doesn't tell you what to do.
Right, but this is at least a major, if not a critical accessibility bug at head, is my understanding, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is accessibility and usability for sighted people. It does at least still have the visually hidden label.
Okay, it does tell you the format after you typed it in wrong. So I guess that's something it does. I don't understand what problem we're trying to solve by not having the text there by default and hiding it if you don't need it. That's what's doing hidden.
So the problem is that if you run Chrome without JavaScript, then you would get those help tests, even though they're irrelevant.
Because you're just going to use the date picker, which is a far better experience. So what the help text says is irrelevant, because you're just going to use the date picker and be on your way.
Well, if I, as the person writing the help text, say, enter the time in, month, day, year, but the browser automatically localizes that to the date and time format that's relevant in that person's country, we're giving the users the wrong instructions so that they, enter, May 10th instead of October 5th, that kind of thing.
Right, okay. So the reason to do it this backwards way is because if it's done with JavaScript, we can account for those localization tweaks.
No, we can take into account whether the browser supports the localization or not. So we don't show it if it does, because then it supports the date input. Yeah. If it doesn't, then we should.
I guess do that. It's still awful, but yeah, I get that it's no more awful than we do currently. So
yeah, and this is like we talk of a very small percentage of users.
No, I know.
As far as I know, it's like around 1% of the whole global traffic is now JavaScript, and we are talking of like that 1% of the 9%.
Yep.
Have we considered just not using date inputs?
So that's something we want to consider in the follow-up.
Yeah. By the way, is this the latest Claro?
This is.
We completely unrelated. We have a use of color failure.
Yes, we actually do have a fix. We have an issue for this, but
Yeah.
not for the error. The error is that's not fixed, but for the focus we have.
No, it's the you can't tell between the blue and the blue and the red, or the black
Yeah,
and the
so
red.
we have to focus. So there's going to be the green focus ring, just like on the other elements.
No, it's not to do with focus. It's
So
it actually changes. It's not the final design, the one that is right now in here. So what is going to happen when there's the focus is that it's going to appear a ring around the field itself. The border itself, it's not going to change the color. So the moment that you actually have an error and you are actually focused also, you will have the red border and also around it the outline or the another border that I think it's like 3 pixels or 2 pixels thick.
was it
that.
the designs had an icon for error as well, didn't it?
Yeah, but it's not implemented.
Right. Okay, that's coming then.
Yeah, we do still need that.
Okay. Did you get what you needed out of that discussion? Or do we still need to continue?
Can I just weigh in on one thing I want to emphasize on the error message? If you can throw an error message, I just want to point out one thing that I think helps, like, just standardize the messaging. Can you submit it with like a letter? Yeah. So when we suggest the format, I think we have to keep it really standard, where we say, please enter the date format in YY-MM-DD, you know, like the letter, the uppercase letters, and then parentheses, E.G, and the example. And always do that in all places so that it reinforces what we're trying to say to someone. Because we've just changed how we're communicating what the format is. We're giving an example of the date.
That's today's date, isn't it?
Yeah, and if we're going to then on the input say, you know, YY, day, month, let's keep it standard. Let's just get it in the same format everywhere. Just reinforce the pattern.
So why are we using the letters to actually describe the format?
Because people can't tell the difference between month and day in certain situations.
You know, it's funny,
Right.
Catch had a suggestion though 32 minutes ago while we were on this call to just use a static date like 25th of January at 17:30 or whatever, so that there's always
Oh.
That's interesting.
That would be great actually, because
that would work.
Yeah, and it doesn't, because a lot of times you don't even realize that it's actual the current date what you are having there.
Yeah, I didn't realize it until I was told.
Okay, but if we do that, can we at least make the year current? Because, you know, 20 years down the road, this will never have changed, and then the example date will be 20 years out of date. I know that's like a tiny thing, but
that's a good one.
Or just make it 2053.
Makes epoch or something like that. We can, because that's January 1st. But anyway, yeah, that's fine.
That's a great suggestion. That's much simpler.
I kind of like an Easter egg of January 1st, 1970 or something, or like December 31st, 1969. I don't know. I go back to my original suggestion.
So are we?
Let's not add another round of bike shedding into this thing.
Come on, just 1 hour more.
So are we fine if we remove this explanation of the format and replace it with a static date? So we keep the year dynamic, but we change the date and the month to be static.
But
Yeah.
some copies saying enter the date with this format or something.
I don't know.
like
The help text is still better, even with a static date. Like this screenshot you got up, that's definitely more clear, regardless of this, if it's a static date or a dynamic date. So I think I would keep it the same.
Okay.
Just fix my TT to a DD.
No,
Yeah.
I'll copy and paste it from this JPG directly.
Why?
Perfect.
Thursday.
Okay. So we're fine going with the JavaScript approach then. I read it as such.
Yeah, I think because the technical reason has been laid out why we need to do that, I think that's okay. Because it's better to have no help text, which is the current situation in head anyway, than incorrect help text.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would assume so.
This is a really complicated issue. I'm gonna need some time to digest it more, but I kind of remind myself how this all works in all the different browsers.
Yeah, this was a visual thinking that we start off with and then be done quick and then let you go off.
Yeah, sorry. I thought we were bike shedding labels of shit. I didn't know we would go down this rabbit hole. Hey, I learned a bunch of stuff, so that's cool.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, is it okay? Because the more we rely on native things like date pickers or I can't think of other ones, but date pickers, like that's great, but there's obviously an inconsistency between browsers and implementations and how accessible certain ones are. Is it at all Drupal's responsibility to improve on the accessibility or usability of certain native ones, or is that a non-issue for Drupal because it's a native one and that should be the browser's responsibility?
I think it's a contributor responsibility, not core. I mean, web form supports date picker and time picker, and people use them heavily. Like I see a lot of examples where people are like, I don't want to use the default HTML5 date picker, and they switch back to the jQuery UI date picker and the time picker. But I don't think core should be that opinionated. Core should stick to HTML5 and contrib. Someone will do a date picker field, like a date picker field format, or form element format. I think it's a slippery slope.
Was the sense of that, is it Drupal's responsibility? Was there a sense of that if the native HTML5 has accessibility problems, is it our job to fix it? Was that what you meant?
That was
we
kind
did
of,
we did
yeah.
already make a decision, like not to rely on browser validation just because it was such a horrible accessibility issue. Well, that was a decision we made prior to Drupal 8. We were going to go, full steam ahead on browser side, client side validation, but so we did make a decision in that regard. It probably depends on like how bad the issue is and versus like how much Drupal can do about it.
When I tried Firefox with NVDA earlier today, just before the call, I was quite impressed with it. I'm under the impression that this has actually improved at some point over the last couple of years. The WebCAG does have a position on this. To give you when native HTML5 date pickers first appeared, they were really awful. Like some of them didn't work very well for keyboard users. Some of them didn't really report their role to assistive tech either. When I tried the Firefox one with NVDA, I was quite impressed that each of the month, day, year were kind of correctly identified individually. I think at some point in the past, that hasn't been the case, at least with some browsers, which is why I'm curious to go and remind myself how they all work nowadays. But WebCAG has this notion of technology which is said to be accessibility supported. That's kind of like a definition that has a special meaning in WebCAG. And what that means is it's a technology which the browsers have correctly implemented, and then they expose in their accessibility tree, so that the operating system can pick it up with the operating system's accessibility API, and then that then passes through to the assistive tech like the screen reader, and then the screen reader is knowing what to do with it correctly when it gets the information from the operating system API, and all the way back again in the opposite direction. And the idea that what WebCAG calls accessibility supported means all those ducks are in a row. And if they're not, then you have something which you say basically somewhere along the line it doesn't work, and it might be the browser's fault or it might be the operating system's fault. So washing your hands of that and say, oh well, it's not our fault, it's the browser or it's Windows that's the problem. That wouldn't be enough to satisfy WebCAG, the way that WebCAG's phrased. If you do have a technology where all those ducks are in a row, then you can rely on it. But if it doesn't work, then you can't rely on it per WebCAG. So in that situation, it kind of would be our job to fix it.
I don't know. I feel like an application taking on browser level bugs, that's a lot of stuff for us to tackle, especially when we're trying to get like a release out, you know, that we have to, or all of our users are going to lose security and stuff, you know.
Yeah, it's a pain, but that's basically what WebCAG says.
But keeping in mind though, this is also like where we're talking about an accessibility issue that exists in CAD too, right? Like it's not only limited to the scope of what might be changed by the fix we're trying to get in for Safari, IE11, etc. For the changes that we make to those browsers. There's clearly multiple accessibility issues in CAD that we should probably just address on their own separately. So I wouldn't consider them to be release blocking for us to do this unless specifically there's a regression from head to 8.8 in, say, Safari using navigating with assistive technology with this change. That's the point that I would block this change on that. Whether or not that's the browser's fault or not actually doesn't matter, because the point is we would be having an accessibility regression. So.
Yeah, I mean, we've got the situation where it's a HTML5 date input before and after this patch. So, it's likely a problem we've got already. And we died. Have we died?
Nope, you're still here. I think we're all just in stunned silence.
It's a pickle. Yeah.
Every time you go into the daytime realm, you think something simple, and then 3 months later, you come out the other side. Your family doesn't know your name anymore. You haven't shaved.
Pretty much.
That issue we saw briefly, which was Ali issues with date picker. What was the node number on that? Because I want to kind of curious when the last time that was updated.
That's actually a very new issue.
Yeah, it's the old issue, isn't it? Or is it a new issue?
It's a new issue. It was open as a follow-up to this issue to figure out if we could find a date picker that provides better accessibility than the native date picker, and we would replace the input type dates with that.
Oh, I found it now. It was in the referenced by. There we go.
Okay, so because my assumption was that we were taking out jQuery UI date picker, and we weren't putting anything else in place. We're just going to use the HTML5 one. But eventually, are we going to have something in core, or are we just always going to rely on HTML5 one?
I think that depends on the outcome of that issue. We have to make a decision on that later. Like we have to evaluate what is the best.
If we did do that, if we did implement something to replace it, then at least we know that everybody is getting a consistent experience regardless of browser.
Yeah.
In our research, what we found is that everything, like the date picker that jQuery UI provides, has its own set of usability and accessibility issues, but every single other thing we evaluated was much worse in some way or another.
Okay.
So it's unfortunately, it's a problem that's solved so many times, but we spent about a month, I think, researching and prototyping alternatives, and they're just really, in this particular case, for this one, it wasn't.
Okay.
So it could be a long road. The holy grail of the perfect date picker.
So the deprecate and remove, the idea is we're saying in Drupal 8 that jQuery UI date picker is deprecated, but it's still going to be there. Is that right?
The library will still be available in core.
But removed in 9.
And yep, it will be removed in 9. The question that we still need to work out, which we need to discuss on a case-by-case basis for each of these issues, and this would depend on the exact patch, is how much of the converting cores usages to skip how much we actually do in 8.8 versus just saying, oh, in Drupal 9, this is what the behavior is going to be, stop using it in Drupal 9, versus how much we want, like whether there's a disruption, an acceptable amount of disruption to saying, oh, here's the new behavior in 8.8, try it out, and just be prepared for the startup.
That makes sense, yeah.
It's a separate discussion, but then for some of the other issues, it's something where it's, there's nothing actually user-facing that's changing, so we don't need to worry about it. But then on the other hand, for something like the autocomplete replacement that we've been exploring, that definitely has a lot of user-facing changes, as well as markup changes, CSS, and so we would follow a different, we would probably still keep the old one around, even if we had once more, and just we're considering offering the new one as like an optional experimental module that we would then switch to. So. We'll know for sure though, depending on how this most recent prototype that we recommended turns out, which path forward we'll take.
I'm going to miss jQuery UI.
I agree. I'm going to have problems. I'm going to have to rewrite a lot of code, but it's okay.
It served us well.
Life-changing experience, this.
Well, we'll still have, if I'm right, we'll still have just pure jQuery in core, but we won't have the UI elements.
And it's available as contrib libraries that people can use. It's just with the risk that your mileage may vary. You're installing code that has no security coverage. So sorry.
Just to make sure it's clear, deprecated. So the jQuery UI date picker deprecated in presumably 8.8, removed in 9. So deprecated means, in the context of jQuery UI date picker, that means it's not, the library is still there underneath, but it's not actually used, or it's actually used and presented where appropriately, like it is right now, and the library is still there. But it's just documented that you shouldn't depend on this.
Yeah, so if someone's got a custom module that relied on it,
So-
we don't suddenly break it for them.
Right. So that's the decision I just said that we're going to have to make based on the exact final patch. We're going to have to look over specifically all of the parts of the user interface and the markup, the CSS, the JavaScript are changed, and decide whether we want to start offering this new experience in Safari in 8.8, or whether we think that the user interaction change is too disruptive, and whether we want to defer that to 9.2. But so definitely the library will still be there in Drupal 8 core. Maybe core itself will still be using it for date fields, or maybe it won't by default, but there's an option to turn it on, or maybe it just won't at all. But we need to go through and look. Once we have a prototype that has consensus otherwise, then we'll figure out which of those things happens in 8.8 versus 9.0, etc., based on how disruptive it is.
Okay.
Okay, I feel like I've got everything that I need to move forward on this issue.
We took your whole meeting. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry for everyone who didn't have a chance to present their ideas.
I know that Adam Hoynick had to jump out, but he had if folks on this meeting still would like to give some feedback on multilingual and migrate integration issues, that would be great. I'll find the URL and paste it in Slack. And then one last thing is we're talking about moving this meeting backwards in time by a couple of hours, perhaps. There's a doodle in the UX channel, so if you could please fill it out. We're trying to pick a time that's a little bit friendlier for Europeans, and especially for Lowry, who's currently up at like 4 in the fucking morning or some stupid thing. So we should hopefully stop that from happening. So if you could fill that out, that'd be great. That's also in the UX channel on Drupal Slack. And then I think that wraps us up. So
Yeah.
thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
everyone.
usability and
Thank you.
accessibility wizards. We love you.
All right, cool. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.